Welcome to the Explainer. Why are some countries so incredibly rich while others seem permanently trapped in poverty? It's one of the biggest, most important questions out there. Today, we're diving into the powerful answer offered in the book Why Nations Fail, and it all kicks off with a single, stunning image taken from space. Just look at this! This is the Korean peninsula at night. South Korea is just this brilliant web of light. You can see the cities, the industry, the prosperity. And right next door, North Korea is a vast sea of darkness. We're talking about the same people, the same shared history, the same geography. So what on earth explains this shocking difference? This single picture really gets to the heart of the puzzle. What truly explains why there are such huge gaps in wealth and poverty all around the world? Is it something permanent and unchangeable? Or is it something that we can actually do something about? Okay, so one of the most common theories you'll hear is that it all comes down to geography. You know, the idea that a country's fate is basically sealed by its climate and its location. Temperate zones get a head start, while tropical zones are held back by disease and bad soil. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty plausible, right? But history, well, it tells a totally different story. In fact, history shows us this incredible reversal of fortune. Go back 500 years, and the wealthiest, most complex civilizations in the Americas were the Aztecs and the Incas, in what is now Mexico and Peru. North America, by comparison, was seen as sparse and way less developed. Today, that entire relationship is completely flipped on its head. So geography obviously can't explain a switcheroo like that. All right, so if it's not geography, then maybe it's culture. This is another popular argument. The idea that certain values, like a specific work ethic or a particular religion, are the real ingredients for economic success. Well, let's jump right back to our first example, the Koreas. Before they were divided after World War II, they were one people, with one culture, one language, one history. Today, one is a global economic giant, and the other suffers under a horrifying dictatorship with widespread famine. If culture were the main driver, a gap this huge just shouldn't be possible. This brings us to a third idea, something you could call the ignorance hypothesis. Maybe leaders in poor countries just don't know any better? You know, maybe if they just got better advice from top-tier economists and experts, they could fix things and make their countries prosperous. But the book argues this is completely 100% backward. Poverty is not an accident. It's a result of choices that are made deliberately. Rulers often know exactly what they're doing. They put policies in place that create poverty for the vast majority, but generate enormous wealth and power for themselves and their friends. It's not a mistake, it's by design. So if it's not geography, and it's not culture, and it's not just leaders being ignorant, what's left? Well, the book argues the real, crucial difference comes down to a country's institutions. Think of them as the basic rules of the game that shape all of our lives. So what exactly do we mean by institutions? They're the rules. They're the answers to questions like, can you trust the courts to protect what's yours? Is it safe to start a business, or will you just have to pay bribes? Can you get a loan based on a good idea, or only if you know the right people? These rules create the incentives that drive everything. And this brings us to the central idea of the book. Institutions really come in two main flavors, inclusive and extractive. Inclusive systems create a level playing field. They have secure property rights, and they encourage everybody to invest and innovate. Extractive systems do the exact opposite. They're designed by a small elite to rig the game and funnel all the wealth and power straight to the top. And here's the kicker. You can't really separate the economic rules from political power. These extractive economic systems, like say a state monopoly handed to a political crony, are only possible because you have extractive political systems to prop them up, where all the power is in the hands of a few people with no real checks or balances. So why would any elite want to block progress? Because they are terrified of what economists call creative destruction. This is the engine of all progress. It's when new technologies and new businesses come along and destroy the old ones. Think Netflix and Blockbuster. But if your wealth and power are tied to that old order, then innovation isn't an opportunity. It's a mortal threat, and you will fight to stop. This all creates a really powerful feedback loop, a vicious circle.
It starts with political power concentrated in the hands of a few. That elite then designs an extractive economy to make themselves rich. That wealth then flows back to them, which they then use to crush any opposition and tighten their grip on power. The whole system just feeds itself, getting stronger and stronger and trapping the country in poverty.
Okay, so that sounds pretty bleak. But the good news is, history isn't destiny. This vicious circle isn't unbreakable. History is filled with what the authors call critical junctures. These are huge events, like a plague, a revolution, or the opening of new trade routes, that totally shake up the system and create a rare window of opportunity for change. England's history is the classic example of how a virtuous circle can get started. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 was a critical juncture. A broad coalition managed to wrestle power away from an absolute monarch. And with that political shift, they started creating more inclusive economic rules. Property rights became more secure, monopolies were broken up. And this new, leveled playing field is what unleashed the wave of creativity and energy that powered the Industrial Revolution. So this is all a really fascinating way to look at history, but why is it so important for understanding the world right now? Well, because this way of thinking completely changes how we approach global poverty and development. For starters, it gives us a really clear reason why so much foreign aid doesn't work. For decades, the strategy has been to just pour money into poor countries. But if the underlying institutions are the problem, you're not fixing anything. You're basically just pouring water into a leaky bucket. When you pour aid money into an extractive system, it doesn't go to building schools or hospitals. It gets captured by the elite. In fact, some estimates suggest that in the most extractive places, as much as 90% of aid is siphoned off or wasted. The money that's meant to help just ends up becoming more fuel for that vicious circle. This tale of two billionaires is a perfect modern-day example. You've got Bill Gates, who built his fortune through innovation within a relatively inclusive system, a system that eventually used its own laws to challenge his monopoly. And then you have Carlos Slim in Mexico, who built a massive part of his empire by using his political connections to acquire privatized state monopolies. It's the classic difference between making wealth through innovation and making wealth through connections. So, the single most important takeaway is this: poverty is not inevitable. It isn't some fate that's sealed by a country's location or its culture. It is a direct consequence of the political and economic rules a society chooses to live by. Prosperity is a choice, and that's the bottom line. If we really want to fight poverty, we have to look past the symptoms, like a lack of education or health care. We have to go deeper and address the root cause, the extractive institutions themselves. The real struggle is about transforming how power is held and how it's used. And this all leaves us with a huge final question. If poor countries are poor by design, chosen by powerful elites who actually benefit from that system, can well-meaning outsiders ever truly fix the problem? Or does real, lasting change always have to come from the ground up, driven by the empowered citizens of a nation demanding more inclusive institutions for themselves? That's the challenge this powerful framework leaves us to think about. Thanks for watching The Explainer.